In 2007, Nokia sold 1 out of every 2 phones on Earth. 5 years later, the company was gone. This is how the world's biggest phone maker lost everything to a company it laughed at. Nokia was founded in 1865 in Finland, originally as a wood pulp mill on the banks of the Nokia River. Over the next century, Nokia expanded into rubber, cables, and electronics, long before anyone connected the name to phones. In 1992, under new Chief Executive Officer Jorma Ollila, Nokia made a decisive choice: sell every other division and focus entirely on telecommunications. That single decision turned Nokia from a Finnish industrial conglomerate into a focused mobile phone company almost overnight. In 1994, Nokia launched the Nokia 2110, one of the first phones designed for everyday consumers rather than business executives. By 1998, Nokia had overtaken Motorola to become the largest mobile phone manufacturer in the world. Nokia held that position for the next 13 years, longer than almost any company has dominated a single consumer technology market. In 1999, Nokia released the 3210, which sold over 160 million units and became one of the best-selling phones ever made. Nokia phones were known for their durability, long battery life, and a simple, reliable user interface that worked the same way across every model. By 2007, Nokia controlled roughly 50% of the global mobile phone market, selling more phones than its next several competitors combined. That same year, Nokia's market value reached approximately 150 billion, making it one of the most valuable companies in Europe. But on January 9, 2007, in San Francisco, Apple co-founder Steve Jobs walked on stage and introduced a product called the iPhone. The iPhone combined a phone, an internet browser, and a music player into a single device, controlled almost entirely by touch. Inside Nokia's headquarters in Espoo, Finland, executives reportedly viewed the iPhone with skepticism rather than alarm. Nokia's own engineers had experimented with touchscreen phones years earlier, but leadership prioritized keyboards, believing customers preferred physical buttons. Anssi Vanjoki, a senior Nokia executive, publicly dismissed the iPhone's high price, predicting it would not significantly threaten Nokia's market share. Nokia's phones ran on an operating system called Symbian, originally developed in 1998 and built primarily for physical keypads, not touchscreens. Symbian had powered Nokia's rise for nearly a decade, but adapting it for a touch-first world required rebuilding much of its core architecture. Meanwhile, in 2008, Google released Android, a free open-source mobile operating system available to any phone manufacturer that wanted to use it. Companies like Samsung, HTC, and Motorola adopted Android quickly, building modern touchscreen phones without needing to develop their own software from scratch. Nokia chose not to adopt Android. Instead, it continued investing in Symbian, believing its existing software advantage would hold. In 2008, Nokia still sold more smartphones globally than Apple and every Android manufacturer combined, but the smartphones Nokia sold ran an aging operating system that developers increasingly found difficult and frustrating to build apps for. Apple's App Store launched in July 2008, giving outside developers an easy way to build and sell software directly to iPhone users. Nokia's equivalent app platform, called Ovi Store, launched a year later, in May 2009, and never attracted the same developer interest. By 2010, while Apple and Android phones gained app ecosystems with hundreds of thousands of available apps, Symbian struggled to keep pace. Inside Nokia, internal teams were also developing a separate, more modern operating system called MeeGo, intended to eventually replace Symbian. MeeGo development moved slowly, caught between competing internal priorities and uncertainty about which software direction Nokia should fully commit to. In September 2010, Nokia's board replaced Chief Executive Officer Olli-Pekka Kallasvuo with Stephen Elop, a former Microsoft executive. Elop was the first non-Finnish CEO in Nokia's history, brought in specifically to address the company's stalling smartphone strategy. On February 11, 2011, Elop published an internal memo that was leaked publicly, describing Nokia's situation using a specific metaphor. He wrote that Nokia was standing on a burning platform, forced to make a difficult choice or be consumed by the fire around it. That same day, Elop announced Nokia would abandon both Symbian and MeeGo entirely, in favor of a new partnership with Microsoft. Nokia's future smartphones would now run Windows Phone, an operating system Microsoft had only recently introduced and which held a tiny share of the market. The announcement caused Nokia's stock price to fall 14% in a single day, the sharpest drop the company had seen in over a decade. Investors worried Nokia had abandoned its own software, built over more than a decade, in favor of an unproven outside platform. Developers who had built apps for Symbian had little reason to rebuild them for Windows Phone, a much smaller ecosystem at the time. Nokia's existing Symbian customers also had no clear upgrade path, since the platform they owned was now officially being phased out. The first Nokia Windows Phone, the Lumia 800, launched in November 2011, nearly 5 years after the original iPhone. By the time the Lumia line arrived, Apple's iOS and Google's Android already controlled the vast majority of the global smartphone market. Nokia's overall mobile phone market share, which stood at 50% in 2007, fell to approximately 24% by 2011. In 2011 alone, Nokia's smartphone division reported an operating loss of over 1 billion euros. Samsung overtook Nokia as the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer by total units sold in early 2012, ending Nokia's 13-year reign. Nokia's market value, which had reached roughly $150 billion in 2007, had fallen to under $10 billion by 2012. In April 2012, credit rating agency Moody's downgraded Nokia's debt-to-junk status, citing the company's deteriorating smartphone position. Nokia cut tens of thousands of jobs between 2011 and 2013 as it closed factories and restructured its mobile division repeatedly. The Lumia line, despite positive reviews for its camera technology, never captured more than a few percentage points of global smartphone market share. App developers continued prioritizing iOS and Android, leaving Windows Phone users with a smaller selection of apps than their competitors. By 2013, Nokia's mobile phone division had lost money for 8 consecutive quarters, with no clear path back to profitability. On September 3, 2013, Microsoft announced it would acquire Nokia's entire mobile phone business for approximately 4 billion euros. The deal included Nokia's devices and services division, along with a licensing agreement for Nokia's remaining patents. Stephen Elop, the CEO who had led Nokia into the Microsoft partnership, returned to Microsoft as part of the same acquisition. That detail led some critics to question whether Elop had been positioned from the start to guide Nokia's mobile business toward Microsoft, regardless of outcome. The acquisition officially closed on April 25, 2014. Nokia, the company that had defined mobile phones for over a decade, no longer made them. Microsoft renamed the acquired division Microsoft Mobile, and within 2 years, most of the Nokia smartphone brand had quietly disappeared from store shelves. In May 2016, Microsoft sold the remaining feature phone business to a company called HMD Global for approximately $350 million. HMD Global later licensed the Nokia brand name to release new phones, though the original Nokia Corporation had no direct involvement in making them. What remained of Nokia, the corporation, shifted its focus entirely toward telecommunications, network infrastructure, and patent licensing. In April of 2015, Nokia announced the acquisition of French telecom equipment maker Alcatel-Lucent for approximately 6 billion euros. That deal positioned Nokia as a major supplier of network equipment to telecom carriers worldwide, a business far removed from consumer phones. By the time the deal closed in 2016, Nokia's identity had transformed entirely, from the world's leading phone brand to a behind-the-scenes infrastructure company. Researchers in business schools began studying Nokia's collapse as a case study in what became known as the innovator's dilemma. That term, coined by Harvard professor Clayton Christensen, describes how successful companies often fail specifically because of the strengths that made them successful. Nokia's strength had been hardware, durable phones, long battery life, and a massive global manufacturing and distribution network. The iPhone's threat was not hardware, it was software, an ecosystem of apps and a touch interface that Nokia's existing strengths could not counter. Nokia's engineers were not unaware of touchscreens. Internal prototypes existed years before the iPhone launched. But Nokia's organizational structure rewarded incremental improvements to existing hardware, not the kind of complete software reinvention the market suddenly demanded. Former Nokia executives later described an internal culture where middle managers were reluctant to deliver bad news upward about emerging competitive threats. A 2015 academic study based on interviews with 76 Nokia executives found that fear of criticism inside the company suppressed honest reporting about the iPhone's threat. By the time senior leadership fully grasped the danger, Apple and Google had already built years of lead time in software and app ecosystems. Nokia's decision to build on Symbian for as long as it did meant the company spent years defending an aging platform instead of building a new one. When Nokia finally abandoned Symbian for Windows Phone in 2011, it had effectively chosen a third platform, behind two competitors with years of market head start. Windows Phone itself never reached more than roughly 3% of the global smartphone market at its peak, far short of what Nokia needed to recover. Some analysts argue Nokia's true mistake was made years earlier, when it chose not to adopt Android in 2008 while it still held market leadership. Had Nokia paired its hardware scale with Android's growing ecosystem early, the outcome might have looked very different. Instead, Nokia spent its most valuable years, 2007 through 2011, defending Symbian, while its two real rivals built unstoppable software platforms. Jorma Ollila, the CEO who had built Nokia into a global leader in the 1990s, later admitted publicly that Nokia underestimated how quickly software could reshape the industry. Stephen Elop's burning platform memo, intended to force urgent action, is now widely studied as both a warning and a final admission that Nokia had already fallen behind. The speed of Nokia's decline remains one of the fastest falls for a market leader in modern corporate history. In 2007, Nokia commanded roughly half of all mobile phone sales on Earth. By 2013, its mobile phone business no longer existed as an independent company. That collapse took place in roughly 6 years, a remarkably short span for a company that had taken over a century to build its industrial foundation. Today, Nokia Corporation still exists, but as a telecommunications infrastructure company, supplying network equipment to carriers around the world. It no longer ranks among the companies people associate with mobile phones, despite having defined that entire industry for over a decade. The phones bearing the Nokia name today are made under license by HMD Global, a company that did not exist during Nokia's years of dominance. Anssi Vanjoki, the executive who once dismissed the iPhone's threat, left Nokia in 2010, before the company's full decline had played out. Stephen Elop received a severance package worth approximately 8 million euros when Microsoft completed its acquisition of Nokia's mobile business. That payout to the executive who oversaw the company's final collapse drew significant criticism from Finnish media and the public. Tens of thousands of Nokia employees, many in Finland, lost their jobs as the company shrank from its mobile phone peak. The city of Espoo, where Nokia's headquarters still stands, had been economically tied to the company's fortunes for decades. At its peak, Nokia represented roughly 4% of Finland's entire gross domestic product, an enormous concentration of national economic activity in a single company. When Nokia's mobile business collapsed, the impact rippled through Finland's economy, from suppliers and contractors to local consumer spending. Many former Nokia engineers went on to found new technology startups in Finland, using skills built during the company's mobile phone years. That wave of new companies helped diversify Finland's technology sector, though none reached the global scale Nokia once held. Apple's iPhone, the product Nokia executives initially dismissed, went on to become one of the most profitable consumer products in history. By 2012, just 5 years after launch, the iPhone alone generated more revenue than Nokia's entire company at its peak. Google's Android, the operating system Nokia chose not to adopt in 2008, eventually powered the majority of smartphones sold worldwide. Samsung, which built its modern smartphone business largely on Android, became the company that ultimately replaced Nokia as the world's top phone manufacturer. The irony was specific. Nokia had the manufacturing scale to dominate the Android era, but chose a different path at the exact moment that scale mattered most. Business historians now point to Nokia's leadership transition timing as a critical factor, since major strategic decisions came years after competitors had already moved. Symbian, the operating system that powered Nokia's rise, was formally discontinued in 2014, with its final supported device released that same year. An operating system that once ran on more devices than any other mobile platform on Earth simply stopped existing within a single decade. Nokia's story is now taught in business schools alongside Kodak and Blockbuster, as a case study in companies that saw disruption coming and still could not adapt in time. Unlike Kodak or Blockbuster, Nokia's underlying corporation survived, but only by abandoning the exact business that had made it famous worldwide. The company that once put a phone in the hands of half the planet now builds the cell towers and networks those phones connect to instead. In 2023, Nokia's revenue came primarily from network infrastructure and patent licensing, businesses unrecognizable to anyone who owned a Nokia phone in 2007. The 3210, the phone that sold 160 million units, is remembered today mostly as internet folklore, famous for its supposed indestructibility. Nokia's actual downfall had nothing to do with build quality. Its phones remained reliable. Its software simply stopped being competitive in time. 5 years separated Nokia's market peak in 2007 from the closing of its mobile phone sale to Microsoft in 2014. In that span, a company that took over a century to build lost the single product category that had defined its modern identity. The lesson business analysts draw most often is simple. Market leadership built on hardware can be erased by a competitor who understands software first. Steve Jobs, standing on that San Francisco stage in January 2007, did not destroy Nokia directly. Nokia's own response to that moment did. Every major decision after that day, defending Symbian, delaying Android, and finally choosing Windows Phone, narrowed Nokia's options one step at a time. By the time Nokia made its boldest move, partnering with Microsoft in 2011, the smartphone market had already settled around 2 dominant platforms. That is the story of how the company that sold 1 in every 2 phones on Earth disappeared from the industry within 5 years. Not because its phones broke, and not because customers stopped wanting them, but because the world moved to software and Nokia moved too late.